Welcome back to Ripple Effect Connection. I'm your host, Kristi Hujik. I am a health and performance coach and a level 3 integrative health practitioner. Today's topic is a long overdue change. The food pyramid has finally been revamped, and this time it's upside down. Literally, a complete reversal of the model we had before in many areas. But depending on who you follow on social media or online, the new dietary guidelines are either being praised as a long overdue correction or criticized as confusing, incomplete, or even dangerous. So both things can be true. Today, I want to take the emotion out of the conversation, and I want to answer a few questions. What are the changes? How do the new food pyramid and dietary guidelines actually affect you, your energy, your health, your gut, and your daily choices? And just as importantly, what's still missing and what needs to be cleared up with some context? First and foremost, make no mistake about it, this was terrific news. They got the big picture right. It's been decades without a consequential shift in this thinking and in the food pyramid. That is ludicrous considering the information that we've had and how food has evolved. It's crazy that it took this long, but it's here. For a long time, we've been preaching that health is way more than calories in and calories out, and now we see that. But the guidelines aren't perfect. They don't lay all of this out, maybe in as plain language as we'd like. There might be some areas where maybe it's a little bit of a cop-out and a little vague, and there are other areas where you're like, I'm not sure. We're going to talk about all of that today. I don't think a bunch of people saw the new food pyramid and went out that day and said, I'm going to change how I'm eating from day to day. But this is still super important to you, to me, to everyone. We have to understand that these new dietary guidelines affect school lunches, military and hospital food, nutrition education, and public health messaging. So they are issued by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Health and Human Services. So even if you've never in your life followed a food pyramid consciously, you've still been impacted by the policies that flow from it, and so are your children's. On the other side of the coin, broad scope nutritional guidelines will never replace the personalized, individualized nutritional needs that we have to address for every single person. This is how simple I can make it. For every single person, every single food or beverage is either working for or against your health. Now, the key is that answer can differ from person to person. One person's food can be another person's poison. So broad-based nutritional claims or guidelines have never been the way to go as individuals. Nonetheless, this was still a very important step for our country. But if we're going to make a broad-based claim and run with it, it's simple, and the guidelines do lay it out. Eat real food. Not what's made in a lab by man, but real, nutrient-dense, single-ingredient foods. The more of those you have, the better off you're going to be. The truth about processed foods is 100% out. And when I'm talking about processed, I'm really pointing out the ultra-processed foods which have 5 or more ingredients. They are a problem, and they are definitely looked down upon in the new guidelines. And why is this an issue? Because we have a chronic disease epidemic. In the letter, it states nearly 90% of healthcare spending goes to treating people who have chronic diseases. That's a lot. So what exactly are the changes and what are the pros and cons of each of them? 1, protein is now front and center. The guidelines recommend 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. I want this to be more specific. It should be 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of ideal body weight. So what I mean by that is if you're overweight or underweight, you need to adjust that number. So you're thinking ideal body weight. So that's a big difference, but this is a huge jump from what it was before. The number before was about half of this. The former total was just enough to keep you alive, but it was definitely not enough for you to thrive. So now there's an emphasis on prioritizing protein at every meal. No meal is more important to do this than breakfast. You need protein at breakfast. All the breakfast foods that we tend to get in this country, they tend to be processed. They tend to be muffins. They tend to be pancakes. They tend to be Pop-Tarts. They tend to be cereal. You need protein, fiber, fat at your breakfast. And that will make your day go so much smoother from a blood sugar standpoint. So we talk about this in the blood sugar reset. I think that the protein sources that we're talking about here, we're talking about animal sources, which they included red meat in, and we'll talk about that in a second. Plant proteins also like beans, soy, lentils, tempeh, all of those. This is one of the clearest acknowledgments yet that many people, especially women and older adults, are under consuming protein. I can vouch for that definitely from what I've seen in my clinical experience. It is very rare that you get someone who comes in and their protein is dialed in. In fact, you will more likely see people not eating breakfast than people getting the proper amount of protein in breakfast, because a lot of people, they're fasting till the afternoon, which as a strategic tool here and there can be a good thing. Constantly, if you're a woman with adrenal stress and hormones are dysregulated, I'm not sure it's the best idea. So again, it is all about the bio-individuality from each person. Having red meat up higher in the pyramid, I'm just surprised a little bit. And I think I'm surprised because, yes, there's so many great things that can be found in red meat and organ meats. But the thing is, conventional ways that we get our red meat is not exactly ideal. So it's like, it almost needs to be caveated. Yeah, if it's grass-fed, grass-finished, if it's organic and pastured chicken, sure. But I don't know if red meat is that high on my food pyramid, and it may not be on yours either. So I think those are some things that we have to think when we're thinking about the context. But look, overall, I'm doing backflips because protein is a focus. And if you want to know more about protein, Megan Rupp and I, at the beginning of season 2 of the podcast, did this Protein Forward podcast. And I think it's one of the podcasts I've gotten the most questions and feedback about, where people were like, I had no idea I should be eating that much protein. Well, now it's being laid out for you officially in an equation that you can do based on your ideal body weight. Why do we need this protein? It supports muscle mass, blood sugar stability, satiety, helps aging and maintain strength as you get older. Now, here's what can go wrong and what is likely to go wrong. You have to be an astute consumer. What I mean by that is, do you remember when gluten became a thing and we were talking about wheat and we were talking about glyphosate and we had all these people that were getting celiac and gluten sensitivities, and we still have this to this day? What it did is it started a flurry of gluten-free creations. And those gluten-free creations were ultra-processed foods with ingredients that were horrible. So what I don't want you to do is be sucked in by the advertisement that companies are now going to start taking advantage of, saying protein in this, protein brownies, protein cookies. Don't be fooled, okay? When we're talking about protein sources, we need lean meats and good sources of plant protein if you are a plant-based person, okay? So don't fall for the advertising. The next thing, one of the next changes that were in here, full-fat dairy is no longer discouraged, which I think it's good on one hand, but again, not good on another. I think the low-fat fears are now beyond us. We understand that healthy fats can be productive. They can give us energy. They are good for a lot of things in our diet. But, and there's a but here, dairy is one of the 3 foods that I see that are popping up on food sensitivity tests the most. And that is a lot of times because when you are struggling digestively or you have any kind of leaky gut, it can be really difficult to process some of the proteins that are in dairy. So again, I say conventional dairy, not so much. And we're talking, they recommend 3 servings a day, and I definitely wouldn't go to that length to talk about recommending dairy. Look, if you're on a farm and you have raw dairy, that's a whole different ball of wax for a lot of people, and they can tolerate it. Sometimes people can tolerate goat's milk or sheep's milk, but not cow's milk. So there's some considerations in there. Yogurt is a great dairy product that in the morning can get you some protein. But again, I caveat it with the sourcing definitely matters, but I agree that the decades of low-fat messaging are finally over, and that's a good thing. So it's important to remember that guidelines speak to populations, but it's your body that speaks to you. So it's going to still be about how do things work for you. then the next thing that you'll see is a piggyback on that, healthy fat with a confusing caveat when they're limiting the saturated fat. But we're now including olive oil and other unsaturated fats and mention butter and beef tallow specifically, but also say saturated fat should remain under 10% of daily, but also say saturated fat should remain under 10% of your daily calories. So I'm a little confused by that. Now, I will say, with the epidemic we have of heart disease, which is still the number one killer in this world, I would say that there obviously is a subset of people who are not going to be eating copious amounts of saturated fat. The keto days were scary in that people were misusing it, meaning copious amounts of butter and milk and cheese. That's not necessarily going to fly for a lot of people. So I think that's part of why it's in there, but I'm not necessarily on board with the 10%. So it acknowledges traditional fats and moves away from extreme fat fear, but the frequency, the quantity, the quality, the processing, and the context within the whole diet might need to be a little bit clearer in this area. Fats are not villains, but they're not free-for-alls either. So I understand there being some limitations. I'm just not sure where and how we derived at 10%. Number 4, which I think is a big one, is the stronger language on ultra-processed foods. The guidelines now clearly advise limiting highly refined carbohydrates, packaged snack foods, artificial dyes, flavors, preservatives, and non-nutritive sweeteners. This is going to be big in schools. And I'll tell you why. I was at church the other day, and in the missalette, they were asking for donations for children's snacks. And they specifically laid out the products, and they showed some photos, and what did we have? We had bags of Fritos, we had Cheetos, we had potato chips. I totally understand convenience, okay? But we cannot be giving our kids these ultra-processed foods. If they're not good enough for adults, they certainly shouldn't be given to children. So we have got to come up with affordable alternatives for kids at schools. It's an important thing. And can we give them carrots with guacamole? Can we give them something like the dairy's in there. So what about a cheese stick, with some carrots? Like, can we do that? So I really do think we have to get away from the ultra-processed food in schools, and I'm really hoping that these new guidelines will help that because our kids are so important and they can be so affected by a lot of these foods. It's really, really an important shift that needs to happen. It's also one of the most positive shifts in the entire document. What I loved is that they specifically in the document mentioned the microbiome and mentioned fermented foods and gut health and what the gut microbiome even is. So I thought that was really a positive thing. So, I don't know how many people are going out there and reading it, but the language was definitely something that was not in the old format. And I think it's great that we're recognizing these and at least bringing some awareness. We have to have solutions for busy families, right? These ultra-processed foods, we have to have solutions for people in food deserts. If ultra-processed foods are making people sick, which we know they are, okay, but we have to have affordable solutions for people. So that's the next step of all this. Let's find affordable solutions that help people be healthier. And then added sugar, there was a definite firmer stance in this than there was on the old one. No amount of added sugar is recommended. A single meal should contain no more than 10 grams. I still say 0 is what we're looking for. So this comes into label knowledge, knowing how to read a label and understand if there is added sugar in there, right? This can be a good intention to reduce sugar exposure, but the problem is we have to think about the practicality and the confusion in the product. So in my mind, you really still have to be an ingredient reader. We're not getting away from that. And there's so much hidden sugar in products. And that is something that can affect all of us. I've had to teach many adults how to read labels. We probably have to start educating our children on how to do this also. There was some alcohol guidance. The message was pretty clear. It was soft, but fairly clear in that it says less alcohol is better for health, but we don't really have how much. But the drink a day days, those are gone. So yeah, there's some populations of society that are struggling with disease that should avoid it entirely. But the other thing about a drink a day, we're not thinking about what's in the drinks, right? A drink a day, if you're having a gin and tonic, there's sugar in there, right? If you're having beer, there's wheat, and we're talking about the gluten problem. It's very rare that people are having low calorie drinks when they're having drinks, right? So, and it's the wine, if it's not good quality and if we're adding sulfites, like that's a problem too. So I'm glad that there is some mention of alcohol, but I would have liked it to have been a little bit more strict as to what the actual amount per week, per day. It's not a drink a day anymore, folks. And I think, in fact, I've heard about more people giving up alcohol in the last year than I think I've ever heard before. So I think no alcohol is becoming a thing. So next is what stayed the same. So it's still emphasizing vegetables and fruits, whole grains, sodium limits, and saturated fat caps. So some of that hasn't changed, but we are shifting a little bit. I would have liked the fiber conversation to be a little bit more forward. And understanding that is so important if you have that protein and fiber to help with blood sugar dysregulation. And when we're dealing with this epidemic, and we talk about this in the blood sugar reset, we're dealing with this epidemic of people that are pre-diabetic and they don't even know it. And metabolic syndrome is hitting 93% of the population. So I would have liked if fiber was a little more forward in the written conversation, but I think for them, it's like, that message still stays the same. We want you to have a variety of fruits and vegetables. The amount of grains has gone down. I'm not a big low sodium person in that good minerals like sea salt, right? But table salt is a different ball of wax. So that's what they're trying to eliminate in the verbiage in the document. Again, I think the visual kind of minimizes fiber. Like, are we still causing people to fear carbohydrates? We want them to consume carbohydrates if they're through vegetables and fruit and whole foods. So there's a little bit of confusion when it comes to that. But I think fiber, at the end of the day, I go back to the fiber being the thing that deserved equal billing on here to be talked about. Protein and fiber. And I think the healthy fats. So you can't talk about metabolic health, hormones, or gut health without fiber. That's so important. So I thought maybe the light would have been shown on that a little bit more. The individualization is always going to be missing. The guidelines can't account for autoimmune disease, insulin resistance, gut dysfunction, trauma, stress, all of that. So again, the population guidance does not equal the personal prescription. So I think we're still going to have to figure out what's best for each of us individually without this being our blanket way of doing things. I still think the processed food language needs some clarity because people get so overwhelmed. I think there needs to be more discussion about how to replace that, right? And the marketing that we see around this country is definitely around processed foods and junk foods. So hopefully that changes with this, but that's still a problem. There's no mention of stress, sleep, nervous system regulation, not really in there, right? So those are the nuances that we have to help each person with. So that's what health coaches do. I don't think there's a person on the planet who couldn't benefit from a health coach, honestly. There's just so much to talk about. And I hear these conversations all the time. I was in so many coffee shops over the last 2 months during the holiday. I would go to the coffee shop and do some work. A lot of days without headphones. And I can't help but overhear some conversations. The amount of conversations I overheard that were talking about weight loss, health, someone not feeling good, someone in chronic pain, there's not a single person who couldn't benefit from 3 to 4 months or more with a health coach to help you learn you and what's best for you. And that is the nuanced part of this. So I feel comfortable and confident being a health and performance coach that this is subject matter that I still need to talk about and I still need to get out. The food pyramid didn't solve those problems. And so we're happy to work with you on those things. But you can eat perfect and still feel awful if your nervous system's fried. So that's also where some focus needs to lie. So let's bring this home. Here's a simple framework that works regardless of diet label. Quality protein, plants and fiber, healthy fats in moderation. Pretty simple, right? Eat real foods. Don't fear carbs, just use them wisely. Don't use refined carbs that are processed, but you can have complex carbs, like a sweet potato. For most people, that's not a problem. Whole food sources are important. Portion to your activity and your metabolism. Reduce the ultra-processed frequency. That's all I'm asking. Reduce the frequency. If we ask people to cut it out completely cold turkey, it may not happen. Perfection is never going to happen. Just think about eating less things in packages, items with fewer ingredients, and more home-prepared foods. Remember, stress changes how food affects you. It affects digestion. It affects blood sugar, inflammation. Nutrition doesn't work in isolation. So while these guidelines are great, I want you to always, always keep the big picture in mind. The new food pyramid isn't something to blindly follow, or I don't even think it's something that we have to get angry about and reject. It's information, and it's an improvement on what was there before. So if you're feeling confused or overwhelmed or frustrated, it's not a personal failure. It's a sign that you just need more guidance, not more rules. You just need to learn to figure out what's best for you. Your body will tell you all the answers you need about any food and how it works for you. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Whole Health Kristi. Let me know what resonated most or what you think about the food pyramid. How has it affected you? What do you want to see change? What do you want to see done to help our children and these food deserts? I'd love to hear from you about that. You can always find full show notes and past episodes at kristihujik.com/podcast. And if this conversation was helpful, please take a moment to like, follow, review, subscribe, or share the podcast with someone who could benefit. We all could benefit from a conversation about the food pyramid. A quick review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on my YouTube channel goes a long way in helping me to continue bringing you meaningful conversations. Stay tuned for the next episode of Ripple Effect Connection. Together, let's create waves of change.